Hello there, very good evening. You're watching London Live News at 6 with Anthony Baxter. Coming up this evening, the Labour leader will quit if he's fined for breaking lockdown rules. Sir Keir Starmer made a statement this afternoon after pulling out of a keynote speech. Tips on how to tackle loneliness. The capital is named England's most lonely city as this year's Mental Health Awareness Week gets underway. We'll take a look at the weather for you. It's going to be pretty nice out there this week. That's coming up in 10 minutes' time. Plus, on the bikes, the Handlebards pedal in as the Sustainable Theatre troupe bring their touring version of Twelfth Night to London. We'll be chatting to the artistic director. And comedian Athena Kugblenu is shaking her class here in the capital. We'll be hearing from the stand-up star about her new special that tackles social standing. All of that to come first, though, this evening. Sir Keir Starmer has pledged to offer his resignation if he's fined by police investigating claims he and colleagues broke lockdown rules last year. Durham Police announced on Friday it was looking into a gathering in April 2021 where Sir Keir had beer and curry with colleagues. Labour insists no rules were broken and that what happened was a work event.
I'm absolutely clear that no laws were broken. They were followed at all times. I simply had something to eat while working late in the evening, as any politician would do days before an election. But if the police decide to issue me with a fixed penalty notice, I would, of course, do the right thing and step down. This matters. It matters because the British public deserve politicians who think the rules apply to them. They deserve politicians who hold themselves to the highest standards. And they deserve politicians who put the country first rather than themselves. They will always, always get that from me.
Let's move on. Havering Borough Council has still not finished its local elections count. 4 days after the polls closed, a recount for the Rainham and Wennington ward will take place this evening. Elsewhere, Labour has lost control of Croydon Council, the authority now under no overall control, with Labour having 34 seats and the Conservative Party 32 seats. The results came through yesterday evening. And the new mayor of Tower Hamlets has been warned by the outgoing mayor that he must deliver on his promises. Lutfur Rahman, who was stripped of the position in 2015 after being found guilty of electoral fraud, won last week's election, beating Labour's John Biggs. Well, Mr Rahman's Aspire party also took overall control of the Borough Council. A jury at the Old Bailey has found 2 men guilty of the murder of Albert Amofa. The 33-year-old bus driver from Croydon was stabbed to death in December 2019 by a group who'd mistakenly thought he had £5,000 worth of cannabis in his car. The court heard how 25-year-old Donald Owusu and 26-year-old Harvey McFoy had planned to abduct him, having fitted a tracker to his vehicle. They stabbed Mr Amofa after he refused to hand over his car keys. A third man, Theo Brown, was found guilty of perverting the course of justice after disposing the car used in the attack. They'll all be sentenced later. A Met police officer has been charged with further serious sexual offences as part of an ongoing investigation. David Carrick had previously been charged with 41 offences against 11 victims. Scotland Yard says the 47-year-old has been charged with a further 3 counts of rape against the 12th victim, who would appear in court on Friday. Sadiq Khan has begun a 5-day trip of the US. The mayor is in America to try and drum up business for London's economy. As part of the visit, he will launch London's biggest ever tourism campaign in Times Square in New York, a £10 million promotions package. He'll also meet with a number of VIPs in the city, as well as in San Francisco, LA and Hollywood. The London Fire Brigade says rising energy bills are forcing people to heat their homes in dangerous ways. The service says it's dealt with more than 100 fires involving open fires, log burners and heaters in the past few months. It's released a picture of a burnt-out property in Kingston-upon-Thames where a fire is understood to have been caused by combustible items left near an open flame. And engineering works on the Bank branch of the Northern Line are on target, with plans to reopen the section between Kennington and Moorgate on the 16th of May, not long to go. The service has been suspended since the start of this year. The works would increase passenger capacity at Bank Station by 40%. There'll be a new entrance, concourse and southbound platform. Right, 1 in 7 of us live in homes where people have skipped meals or gone hungry because of the cost of living crisis. That is according to the Food Foundation. Hebe Campbell reports.
New research has found that 1 in 7 adults live in homes where people have skipped meals or gone hungry because they couldn't afford or access food. The Food Foundation analysed responses from nearly 11,000 UK adults and also found that the number of people struggling to buy food has risen by 57% in 3 months. Another finding suggests that people using food banks are now requesting food that they do not need to cook because of the rise in energy costs as well. Given the cost of living crisis, more people are starting to rely on food banks, but for the same reason, less people are donating food. If you are looking to donate food around the capital, the Felix Project is one of many charities helping to fight food poverty in London. They collect fresh food that cannot be sold and delivers the surplus to charities and schools so they can provide healthy meals and help the most vulnerable in our society. For more info on how to donate, head to their website www.thefelixproject.org.
Hebe Campbell there, looking at how the cost of living crisis is affecting some Londoners. Now, Londoners with antique guns, ammunition and gas-firing pistols are being encouraged to hand over the weapons as part of a new national gun surrender. It'll start this coming Thursday. It's the first surrender of its kind since 2019. The National Police Chiefs Council says many people are unaware that having items like those are against the law. Well, people will be able to hand them over anonymously, and there'll be an amnesty for them to be carried to police stations without the risk of being charged with possession. Now, today is the beginning of Mental Health Awareness Week, and this year's focus is on loneliness. Later in the programme, we'll be tackling that theme head-on with an expert in the field. But first, new research from the Federation of Small Businesses has highlighted the impact of the pandemic on the mental health of the UK's entrepreneurs. A survey of small business owners has revealed more than a third have seen a decline in their mental health since 2020. Matthew Jaffer is from the FSB and joins us this evening. Matthew, just give us a sense then of what the respondents had to say in this poll.
Well, as you said, a third of small businesses owners have said that their mental health has suffered as a result of the pandemic. And this was also coupled with the fact that 60% of businesses who say they are being paid late by their supply chain say it's had an impact on their well-being, and it's an isolation aspect. So it's the issues around being paid late, being isolated that's impacted on small businesses and their mental health and well-being. And with the rise in anxiety and depression and low-level forms of mental health issues as well, it's kind of a spiralling issue that we need to tackle, particularly look into dealing with as it's a crisis rate. For small businesses, they need that support at this time. So finding ways to remove the scourge of late payments that is impacting on small businesses is critical at this time.
Is there a sense that the government is likely to address any of that within tomorrow's Queen's speech? This is a government which is probably not that keen on handing over any more cash. We're fighting at the moment to try and get more cash for people who can't pay their energy bills. Where will small businesses fall in line with that?
Well, I think it's important that we recognise that there is an access to work scheme that's available, and it's important to know that only about 1 in 8 are accessing the access to work scheme that's available by the government. So it's important that any announcement is directing, and so that people who are in the health profession start to direct people to this kind of fit to work support in terms of grants, in support in terms of resources to help them get back into work, because that's available there. So a kind of firmed up area, but also a new enterprise allowance that's been removed to help entrepreneurs who are have a disability, help them, support them who are looking to start up a business. There's funding available. We need to help those businesses. So we'd call for an urgent a renewal of the new enterprise allowance scheme that could help many people into work and start new jobs and start new businesses.
How does that, though, then relate to mental health issues? We're looking at the government being able to help people with mental health issues, but that measure is about helping people start a business.
Well, it is, but that's the thing regarding isolation. It's important to help those people who have suffered during the pandemic. It's critically important. Many people have been off as a result of mental health issues, but also there's this kind of thing that's the kind of the statutory sick pay that businesses have to pay. We want the Chancellor to look at our proposals alongside the TUC. We've worked out joint proposals that the average business, they cost them £3,500. It costs them in terms of lost business, in terms of loss of income, or because they've got to pay for people who are off work due to sickness, and that even was increased during the pandemic. So this kind of form of statutory sick pay rebate would be so welcome that the Chancellor could announce, or some form of announcement could make in the Queen's speech tomorrow, which would help so many small businesses. But it goes back to the point around late payments. 400,000 businesses could be lost this year as a result of late payments. And this has an isolating impact. It affects people's ability to run their business. It has a mental health impact. It's a scourge of doing business. And it's the number one issue that FSB is calling for, that we start to target the poor practice of late payment. And that can come at national level, at mayoral level, but also local authority level as well, to kind of start to get big businesses to pay their bills on time and their supply chain on time.
OK, Matthew Jeffer there from the Federation of Small Businesses. We, of course, will keep across the Queen's speech, setting out what the government plans to do in the next Parliament phase tomorrow. Let's just move on to the weather for you. Staying mild overnight, dropping down to around 15 degrees. Tuesday looks more overcast than today. Still feeling warm, though, highs of about 20 degrees. A slightly fresher feel on Wednesday, but we might see a little bit more in the way of sunshine, and a similar picture on Thursday. Let's just show you these pictures. The Rspca has issued a warning over back garden football nets. The charity says it's had to rescue 6 fox cubs in about a week across South London and Surrey after they became tangled in the nets. The organisation says the incident extremely stressful for the animals, but that people should leave it to experts to help free them. They might need to be checked over by a vet. Keep your eyes on those football nets in the back garden. You're watching London Live News, still to come. More on the launch of Mental Health Awareness Week. We'll be hearing about a campaign to address loneliness in the capital. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. Hello there. Let's take a look at one or two other headlines this evening. There is a warning that energy bills may rise by another £1,000 during next winter. That is according to the boss of Scottish Power. Keith Anderson says the government must take urgent action to help the poorest households. Ministers have offered people £200 off their bill and a council tax deduction for many households, but that won't be enough, according to Mr Anderson. He says if the price cap goes up again, the average annual bill could hit around £3,000. The government says it recognises the pressures people are facing and has set aside £22 billion to help. The Defence Secretary says Russia's military commanders must be prosecuted for war crimes over Ukraine. Ben Wallace made the comments as Russia staged a military parade marking its defeat of Nazi Germany. The UK says Moscow is now the ones inflicting needless suffering. And senior royals will embark on a tour of the UK to mark the Jubilee weekend. Buckingham Palace says the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge will visit Wales over the bank holiday next month. The Princess Royal will be in Scotland, whilst the Earl and Countess of Wessex will travel to Northern Ireland. 4 days of celebrations will begin on the 2nd of June to mark the Queen's 70 years on the throne. Not yet clear where Her Majesty will appear over the weekend. More details then of the Jubilee Spectacular coming up. Now, let's continue with Mental Health Awareness Week, which got underway today. This year's focus is on loneliness, and a nationwide study by the Office of National Statistics during the pandemic found London was the loneliest place in England, and even before the pandemic hit, the capital had loneliness problems. A campaign to address the issue found 1 in 12 Londoners were severely lonely in 2019. Well, earlier we got some advice from the psychotherapist Floss Knight.
I think, certainly from a personal and a professional perspective, I've experienced loneliness and through all times of my life, childhood, the teenage years, which can be really, really lonely, then as a parent, so all of those things impact upon our lives. And there are so many small things that we can do to help with this, which is why I'm such a big advocate of mental health awareness. Because if we have these things in our mind's eye, then there is the possibility of making really small changes, saying hello to that person, checking in with friends and doing those things. And I think, what I learned to do, and I've had 30 years on both sides of the couch, is actually ask for help. And in terms of not asking everybody to help, but asking a trusted individual to help, because that means that you're building a relationship and a rapport to somebody, and that somehow melts the loneliness.
There's often that instinct, isn't there? Because, certainly in a British nature, of either not to say, I'm feeling concerned about something, so I'm going to put my hand up and admit that, or also feeling like they might be burdening people by asking for a little bit of help. How do we overcome that?
Okay, well, I think things are changing, and that's the really, really good news. And I like, when I'm working with clients, actually, when you share how you're feeling with somebody else, you'll often find that there's an identification there. And, you do build relationships, therefore. It's definitely a problem with the elderly, and many years ago, my voluntary work was with victim support, and I met so many elderly people. They were victims of burglary with artifice, and they were so lonely. They hadn't spoken to anybody in days, and they didn't want to be a burden. And and I think we can do more. I'm forever helping old ladies and old gentlemen, just smiling at them. And that affect, what you're doing is you're mirroring something really positive to other people, and they respond to that. And it's, walking a mile in somebody else's shoes is so ultimately, that's where we can make the changes, and we can make the changes as a nation.
Yeah, I think we all have a part to play, don't we? It doesn't necessarily help perhaps being in public, I imagine. There's a difference between being somewhere where there might be lots of people, but feeling like you're actually having the connection which tackles the loneliness.
Yeah, for sure. And that's another thing, you have the loneliness in a crowd. And I think that is something that teenagers suffer a lot from. So particularly in view of social media. So everybody's there, they've got, airbrush lives, filters galore, and they're all having a great time, and you're not. And your perception, so you're comparing your insides with other people's outsides, and you're staying ruminating in your head. And when we're, in our heads, we're not in great company. So I always suggest to younger people that if you're feeling the pangs of FOMO, being left out, etc., that social media is actually not designed to find you friends or make you feel better. It's actually designed to make you compare, and it's highly addictive. So I always recommend that people turn it off, be kind to yourself, and walk towards real relationships rather than ones that are manufactured.
Yeah, often easier said than done, isn't it? But good advice there in terms of switching off those sites which make you feel like you're not as good as you are. Finally, in terms of the impacts that loneliness can have on mental health, where does it relate in terms of stress, anxiety? Some of those are the factors which can which can lead to mental health deteriorating. Where does loneliness fit into that?
Goodness, it's a matrix, and all of those things are interlinked. I think, obviously being aware of things is massively helpful, and that's where therapy can help. You have a relationship with your therapist, and you can understand yourself better with regards to the things that you're doing. It increases anxiety, because if you feel you're either being judged or you're left out, it keys into your shame. I mean, it is a really complicated thing. So therefore, we need to be doing more, be understanding of ourselves. There is a route through this, and and it is really normal. We're salient human beings, and the fact of the matter is that we need contact. We need to belong. We need to be part of a tribe. And if some doors are closed, try to open other doors with regard to setting up, your own evenings out and so on and so forth. And those things are really important. And validating yourself is another really, key part of that. And you can do all that either through therapy, or there are many ways to do that, but, not being a prisoner of shame. Go to our website, therapyguide.com, and we're actually offering a 10% discount so that people can start on that journey. And I found it was life-changing, and a lot of people spend a lot of money on the outside but not on the inside. So we just wanted to do our bit to encourage people and help them take that first step.
For last night there, some tips on how we can address loneliness, and that survey suggesting that London, one of the loneliest places in England. Now, a collection of works raising funds for the charity Refugee Tales is opening in the West End tomorrow. Benjamin Hanvey Cousins' second solo exhibition, Rings of Saturn and Other Objects, is on at Gallery 8. Each work is a response to a literary text with a striking, colourful and multi-dimensional result. Henry has been speaking to Benjamin about the works.
Probably paintings the like of which they haven't seen before, because I think I've got quite a unique method of painting, which involves layering up paint with syringes, and you get an incredible depth. And it should be a very good show to look at, I think. And all the paintings in it are based on books. They're my translations of books into colour.
Talk to me about that inspiration, or the process behind your works, a sort of response to a text. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, it started off as a sort of simple idea that I got interested in why an author would use a colour word, because it's actually a very directive thing to do to a reader's brain. So there's a theory that if you read the word blue, for example, your consciousness is blue for a tiny amount of time, whereas no other word is really like that. So I had the idea that maybe you could just take a well-known book, line up the colours like a barcode, and then almost not have to read the book because you could scan it and you see. And then basically that was the simple idea I began with, but then it sort of built, and I realised there's quite a lot to this, because in a way there is an unconscious to each text, which is made up of colour, which gets quite interesting if you do text. I've done paintings of sort of Mein Kampf and stuff, and you can almost tell the darkness of it through just this. Obviously, the author has no idea they're making this strata of colour throughout their text. But that's what I try and do, is lift that out, turn it into a painting. And for this, I'm using like this gamma blue. This is the guide for this story, which has got the 87 colours from the story marked here. This is the third colour on the painting. Yeah, it takes ages, basically. I mean, years sometimes.
Is there a standout piece to you of all of your works that are in the exhibition?
Yeah, there are two in my mind. There's the Sea, Iris Murdoch, which is a if you see the painting, it's the depth of paint I get is it's huge, and it took me 2 years to paint it, because I literally had to go to the painting well over 6,000 times to add a layer of paint to get it built up, and that's the most epic piece in that sense. But the other one's Chernobyl Prayer, which is Svetlana Alexievich's oral history of the Chernobyl sort of disaster and its aftermath. And I really like that painting. That's probably my favourite one of the show. You've
decided to donate some of the money made from the art to Refugee Tales, haven't you?
Refugee Tales is a sort of charity quite close to my heart, because the charity produces these books which are stories based upon interviews or actually written by asylum seekers who have been in detention in this country. And the detention issue in Britain is a major concern, as far as I'm concerned, as far as everyone should be concerned at the moment. And I think it needs to be, there's a call to end the indefinite detention. And I think it should be supported.
There we go, packed with colour. You can see Benjamin's works at Gallery 8 from tomorrow, there until the 22nd of May. Right, you're watching London Live News with me, Anthony Baxter. We'll have a reminder of our top story coming up after the break. Plus, the eco-friendly Shakespearean theatre troupe who travel the country without polluting the environment. We'll hear about how they're bringing the Bard's work to audiences by bike. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. Hello there, welcome back. Let's remind you of the main story this evening. Sir Keir Starmer has pledged to offer his resignation if he's fined by police investigating claims he and colleagues broke lockdown rules last year. Durham Police announced on Friday it was looking into a gathering in April 2021 where Sir Keir had beer and curry with colleagues. Labour insists no rules were broken and that what happened was a work event.
I simply had something to eat while working late in the evening, as any politician would do days before an election. But if the police decide to issue me with a fixed penalty notice, I would, of course, do the right thing and step down.
Let's move on. Havering Borough Council has still not finished its local elections count. 4 days after the polls closed, a recount for the Rainham and Wennington ward will take place this evening. Elsewhere, Labour has lost control of Croydon Council, the authority now under no overall control, with Labour having 34 seats and the Conservative Party 32 seats. The results came through yesterday evening. And the new mayor of Tower Hamlets has been warned by the outgoing mayor that he must deliver on his promises. Lutfer Rahman, who was stripped of the position in 2015 after being found guilty of electoral fraud, won last week's election, beating Labour's John Biggs. Well, Mr Rahman's Aspire party also took overall control of the Borough Council. The London Fire Brigade says rising energy bills are forcing people to heat their homes in dangerous ways. The service says it's dealt with more than 100 fires involving open fires, log burners and heaters in the past few months. It's released a picture of a burnt-out property in Kingston upon Thames, where a fire is understood to have been caused by combustible items left near an open flame. OK, let's move on. Committed to offering sustainable and environmentally friendly entertainment, the Handlebards, the touring Shakespearean troupe, have announced more than 100 dates across the UK this summer, including several here in London. The group will transport themselves, props, costumes, all by bike, covering around 1,500 miles between now and September, bringing Twelfth Night to the masses this year. Well, earlier I spoke to their artistic director, Tom Dixon.
About 9 years ago, my co-producer and best friend Paul came back he just toured with some Shakespeare and kind of met a friend who was walking from John O'Groats to Land's End. And then they kind of walked together for a bit and they had a chat and they said, you know, wouldn't it be great to combine this idea of sort of sustainable adventure with Shakespeare and performance? And then they thought walking would take a bit too long. So then maybe we could do it on bicycles. And then the jury's out as to which of them came up with the name, the Handlebards. But then I think after that, they had no choice. We had to do it. So then Paul came to me, said he had this crazy idea and asked me whether I'd like to join him. And I said, yeah, sounds great. And here we are 9 years later.
Almost a decade on, you're about to kind of set off on what is arguably your biggest tour so far. Is that right? I think you're planning to do about 1,500 miles.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the actors, they cycle 1,500 miles every year. That's pretty standard. But what? In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if these actors end up doing even more. But they're doing the most shows we've ever done in a tour for sure. They'll be doing over 100 performances in about 90 different venues across the UK. So we've just set off yesterday. We set off from London. We're in Surrey at the moment, and then we're going to be working our way just all up the UK and then all the way back down again.
The aspect of being sustainable is one thing, but what are the limitations on you guys in terms of trying to use bikes for everything? Does that mean that you have to perhaps scale back in terms of set and costume?
Yes, in some respects, yes. In fact, we absolutely do. In the first few years, we'd carry everything in bicycle trailers on the back of our bikes. And that really limited things, but in a positive way. It meant that we had to be economical. It meant that we had to be creative in what we were using and why we were using it, or to use one piece of costume in two different ways for a character. And I think that added a real lovely sense to the performance. Audiences could see how we were being careful about everything we used. And I think it brought a joy to the performance. But since last year, because of since with the pandemic and COVID and people having to socially distance, we decided to add a stage to the mix to sort of raise the actors up so that people could sit further away and still enjoy the performance. And so we wanted to do that, but we didn't want to compromise on our sustainable mindset and our sustainable outlook as a company. So we hired a 100% electric van, and that then tours with the actors. So that has the set in, and then the actors carry on cycling. But it's keeping our emissions as low as possible, basically.
Do you find that the audiences who come, we've looked at pictures of some of the audiences, they range from really young to really old, but do they also come with the same kind of ethical ethos behind them? They're not perhaps coming with mountains and mountains of, picnic goods wrapped in plastic at the same time, or is there perhaps a disconnect between what you guys bring and what they bring?
I think it varies. I think for some people the idea of a cycling has captured their imagination and they will try to be more sustainable. But we're not trying to force that on anyone either. We're not expecting that. I think what's important to us is that people come to the show and enjoy themselves first and foremost, right? And for us to say we're doing this in a sustainable way, and to hope then that people from that take that away and then even just make small changes to their lives, inspired by that. Even if, you just cycle to the corner shop one day, or you recycle a bit more, or I think we're never about sort of hitting that message too hard in that we're expecting our audiences to do the same. We're just saying we can do it. What are the small things that we can all do to make a difference and an impact?
Yeah, and then on the production, this year it's 12th Night. Obviously, the works of Shakespeare, perhaps some of the most performed works we're certainly accustomed to here in the UK. What's your take on these performances, these plays? What have you done with 12th Night, perhaps, to make it slightly different?
I think these performances, I think Shakespeare is great. I think, we've performed these plays all over the world, and people can always relate to these stories. People always enjoy them. They're still funny and relevant, I think. What we do, I guess we only have 4 actors and they have to play all the parts. So that adds a sense of chaos, and organized chaos. And we have a lot of music in the performances, a lot of slapstick comedy. We try and make sure we always want to appeal to, as you said earlier, about our audiences being so diverse. We want to make sure that, everyone from the grandparents down to the 2 or 3 year old who's at the performance has a nice time. And whether, that's just the slapstick comedy or whether that's the delivery of the language or some beautiful music, we try and cater for everyone. It's about getting outdoors, having a picnic with your family and friends, seeing some good, enjoyable theatre and just enjoying yourself.
Tom Dixon there. You can catch 12th Night by the Handlebars. They will be over at the Museum of Order of St John tomorrow, and then Oasis Farm in Waterloo on Wednesday, before continuing across the UK until September. Head to the website for more London dates. You're watching London Live News. Stay with us for our final part. What defines someone's class in this day and age? Upbringing, their accent, or perhaps just how much money they have in their bank account? That is the idea behind comedian Athena Kuglenu's new stand-up show at the Soho Theatre. She'll be in the studio next. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. Welcome back to the final part of tonight's show. Perhaps best known for her appearances on Mock the Week, the comedian Athena Kugblenu is back with a new run of shows at the Soho Theatre. Athena's comedy is very much rooted in the current state of affairs in social and political life, and after a successful series on BBC Radio about cancel culture, her new performance looks at class through her own misconceptions about where she stands. Athena joined Helena in the studio, but first, let's take a look at her in action.
I don't like Ben & Jerry's ice cream. I don't like it, man. When I eat ice cream, I want to eat ice cream. I don't want to eat ice cream and be like fried chicken. Like, they're too experimental, is what I'm saying, right? Do you know how I solve that problem? I stick with Viennetta. Thank you, right? Don't upgrade the dessert. It was good enough in '87, it's good enough now. Don't upgrade it. Like, give me a cheer if you're in a relationship. See, we don't take that approach to other areas of our life, because give me a cheer if that relationship has lasted for more than 12 months. 24 months. Are you due an upgrade?
It's called Shaking Her Class, speaking in third person. Now I think about it, which everybody hates, but I'm going to stick with it, guys. It's called Shaking Her Class, and it's basically about two things: me literally shaking my class, like I'm showing off how middle class I am, but also shaking my class in many ways. Am I shaking off the fact that I'm working class? And it started off after a conversation with myself, because I used to just generally accept that I was a middle class person. I come from a middle class area, I had a middle class upbringing, and then I reconciled that with the fact that my mum was a dinner lady. And I thought, oh, that's quite a working class thing, and people will know that in this country you figure out your class by thinking about what your parents did for a living. So I started to piece together how I managed to get this charade of a middle class existence from a working class mother, and how I also came from that existence to the life I've got now, which is fairly middle class. And that's how the show started, and that's what I talk about. And I talk a little bit about how I'm trying to protect my kids from the kind of excesses of middle classness. That mean they're protected from the idea of having to work hard or having to struggle. How do I give them that struggle that can give them the skills they need in the future?
You know, in your work you've always spoken about class, politics, identity. Why is it important for you to speak about those themes?
I think it's just what I care about. You know, some comedians care about dogs and they write shows about dogs, and some comedians care about gardening and they'll write a show about gardening. So I genuinely talk about these things on a day-to-day basis. Me and my friends chat about this stuff. We watch the news, we do other stuff too. But this is just what I care about, so I just write what I care about. It just so happens what I care about tends to be quite relevant and important. And it has sort of gravitas and people, but it's not. I'm not doing it on purpose. I'm just being myself.
Yeah. Do you think the topic of class makes some people, especially in London, maybe feel a bit uncomfortable sometimes?
Yeah, I do, because we've got a gentrification issue, and some people don't want to be seen as gentrifiers, but ultimately, I mean, I'm a gentrifier. You know, I bought a nice house in a nice area with my partner. I'm a gentrifier because I've pushed out somebody who couldn't afford that house, you know, and we have to accept that. We like to think about how we're part of solutions, but we don't always think about how we're part of problems. And being middle class means you're inevitably part of problems. You're buying things that are causing issues with the environment, for example. You're taking up school places that local kids should be going to. So yeah, it does make people feel uncomfortable because it makes people have to feel accountable, and no one likes to be accountable.
Well, you mentioned earlier your mum and, you know, your family, and do you talk about them in the show, and do they know, and do they mind?
They do know, and luckily I was able to record a BBC show that's on Radio 4 now, and they listen to that show, so they know roughly what I'm saying in the show. I think the trick to writing about your personal life and to writing about people in your personal life is to tell the truth. If you tell the truth, and also it's a well-documented truth, everyone knew my mum was a dinner lady. She didn't hide it.
Yeah.
Everyone knew that we lived in a posh household, and everyone. I don't think everyone. I mean, I won't give a reveal, but I do explain how we ended up in a nice house in a nice area, and most people kind of knew that story who were close to us. So everything in it is true, and that's the key. If you're going to talk about your parents, don't lie.
Have you always done comedy? How long have you been on the circuit now, you know?
No, I haven't always done comedy. I started performing about 10 years ago. I always say that I've only been good for about 4 or 5 years. But before that, I had proper jobs. I was a project manager. I used to do something called community engagement. I used to be a researcher. I've had lots of kind of professional jobs leading up to being a comedian. So I did try really hard to have a normal life. I did try so hard. I tried every form of job you could have that is based in an office. But I thought, you know what, I need to try something else. And that's how I got into comedy.
And that comedy circuit, that's a difficult place to be and a difficult way to live. Do you think that people maybe perhaps since the pandemic are maybe valuing art more, comedy more?
Yeah, I think we're all valuing human interaction, and the beautiful thing about stand-up comedy, it's like there's no fourth wall, right? So I think people missed that. It's not the same, but you can watch a theatre show online. It's not the same, but you can stream a cinema show. But watching comedy online is not the same as being in an actual show and looking a comedian in the eye and thinking, please don't talk to me. You know, there's nothing like that nervousness. So I think definitely we stand-up, people value seeing live stand-up in the flesh more.
Definitely. That front row nervousness, there's nothing like it. How was the pandemic for you in terms of comedy, in terms of not being able to get up on a stage, and, you know, does that make you all the more excited for your Soho run?
So I kind of had both feelings about it. I missed doing live stand-up so much, but at the same time I had a lockdown baby, like a few people did, so I appreciated being able to breastfeed whilst doing a Zoom gig. You know, you move the monitor a bit up and no one knows who's hanging off you. So that was quite good. And also I do a lot of writing, so outside of stand-up I'm a comedy writer as well. So I was very privileged to be in a position of appreciating being at home, but also being able to concentrate on my writing career. But I'm very excited to be back and at the Soho Theatre.
Well, you know, we've spoken about kind of how difficult the comedy circuit can be. I guess it can also be a difficult place in terms of diversity and inclusivity. And I wondered, in your opinion, do you think that inclusivity has got better over the last few years?
It's got better. But we have to remember we were starting at such a low base. Like, improvement isn't good enough. It has to be constant improvement. I always give this example. There were lots of black women comedians out there, loads. I never see them because they never book us. They'll book one of us on a lineup and be like, oh, well, that's our black woman comedian for the night. And it's like, we are not a genre. You could literally have 5 of us on stage, you know, one after the other, at your comedy night, and you will get a diversity of opinions, voices, jokes, energy. And it, you know, I see, like, there are some people that I see and it's like I've had 2 babies since I last gigged with them. You know, so yeah, it's getting better, but yeah, like I said, we started from such a miserable place. Getting better isn't good enough, but I have to concede that people are more open-minded and they're more conscious of diversity in their lineups, and I'm benefiting from that for sure.
Well, you did a show on Radio 4 kind of about cancel culture and delving into that, and I wonder, what did you find in that?
What, cancel culture? Yeah, so I didn't go into that show wanting to tell people what cancel culture is. I went into it wanting to find out for myself, and I came to loads of conclusions, one of which is that if, you know, I have I talk about this in the show, I had once been cancelled in my workplace because in an old job I'd gone through a gross misconduct hearing, and I just sort of thought about how that would have been if it had happened today, because that happened in 2010. You know, there was social media, but not as much, and we weren't that into it. If I'd done what I did in my work emails on social media today, I mean, I wouldn't be talking to you today. So I just thought about I just thought about it through that lens. I thought about cancel culture as something that's always happened, but it hadn't really happened to powerful people before, or before it happened to powerful people who threatened the people who were already in power. So I give the example of Martin Luther King. I think it's a great example of someone. He got cancelled literally before he died. No one was interested in what he was saying before he died, and then he was shot. I mean, if that isn't cancel culture, I don't know what is. So I kind of talk a bit about how the mythology of cancel culture is that it's new and it's not new. But the main conclusion is that I think if it doesn't start with self-reflection, then you can't cancel anyway. We're very good at pointing at people and saying, you know what, you're wrong. But we can't all be right. Everyone pointing a finger can't all be right. So it needs to be balanced with self-reflection. But it's a comedy show. It's not a philosophical show.
Yeah.
There's lots of sketches and stand-up comedy in there.
Athena there speaking to Helena. Her show Shaking Her Class is at Soho Theatre from the 16th of May all the way through to the 21st of May, the week after next. Let's take a quick check on the weather before we leave you this evening. Staying mild tonight, temperatures down to about 15 degrees. Tuesday looks like we might have a bit more cloud than we have had today. Warm though, highs of about 20 degrees. Slightly fresher feel on Wednesday, but again, about 18, 19 Celsius. Not bad, and perhaps more in the way of sunshine. That's all from the news team. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow at 6.